Hello, I'm Rosemary and welcome to yet another opportunity to watch me drink and this time to eat as well, because I'm a cook who loves whiskey and I also love making preserves, and I'm making this at the end of February, so it's been marmalade making time using several oranges. Now, because I love whiskey so much, I think a lot of people over the years have expected me to be a real authority on whiskey marmalade. Well, I've made all sorts of different varieties of marmalade, but I haven't really set my cap at which whiskey I think is the very best to go into my marmalade until this year, because I've been doing a little bit of experimenting on behalf of me and you. So I had 6 small jars about this size. As you can see, they don't look terribly attractive now because lots of people have been wanting to join in playing my game of which whiskey works best in the marmalade. What I did was I made up a standard batch of marmalade using 1.5 kilos of fruit, and for that quantity you would usually add 3 tablespoons of whiskey. And you can find out loads more about marmalade making on my Marmalade Hints and Tips video. So I then divided that batch of cooked marmalade between 6 jars of this size. Actually, I'm lying to you, it was 5 of this size and 1 tiny small one. As I say, to that quantity of marmalade, you'd usually add about 3 tablespoons of whiskey. So I put 1 teaspoon into each of the 6 jars. That's just a little bit less whiskey than you would do if you were making the whole batch with 3 tablespoons. But it seems to have given me a pretty good idea. So my first whiskey marmalade is the Highland Park 12-year-old whiskey. So it's their flagship, if you like. Very naughty piece of peel there. Didn't want to go onto my oat cake. But with the Highland Park 12-year-old, it's a whiskey that I've reviewed twice now, I think. It is very fruity, and there's just that tiny little bit of peaty malt at the back. So now, what adding that whiskey to the marmalade has done is it has brought out all the sort of citrusy, sweet, fruity characteristic of that whiskey, which perhaps isn't quite so upfront on the palate when you taste it usually. But now, with this lovely sort of marmalade-y aroma in front of my very nose, of course, I'm getting fruitiness very much from this whiskey. And what the sugar in the marmalade has done and the acidity of the fruit is it has really brought out the fruity notes of the Highland Park and everything else that's going on in there, the sort of cereal notes like creaminess, etc., and then that little peaty tang at the back is actually a bit more hidden, a bit more disguised. But it works really, really well. Really delicious. Think of your favourite marmalade pudding. You know, whether it's bread and butter pudding with a bit of marmalade on it or whatever it is. That's an absolute cracker with it. Now, I'm very aware of the fact that since I moved to Orkney, I've talked a lot more about Highland Park than I have done about this wonderful Scapa Skiren. Now, all the other whiskies that I'm using now for this marmalade feature are ones that have been either in my Christmas review or my latest winter whiskey review. But the Skiren I think of perhaps more as a bit of a summer whiskey. You know, although it's made here in Orkney, it goes away to Speyside to be matured, and it is really almost a pure Speyside in its character. Now, I'm not saying that in any sort of derogatory way, because goodness knows, and you and I do, don't we, viewer, that some wonderful stuff comes out of Speyside. You know, it would be, well, sacrilege to say anything else. But possibly the Skiren has less of the island characteristics than you would expect. It is a creamy floral nose, slightly salty, and I always get sort of heather honey notes from it. But I have to say, in my tastings, in my previous life in Sussex, this was an absolutely wonderful whisky to have with food. And it went with anything from Thai dishes to really difficult espresso coffee ice cream with real attitude. So it is creamy. Is it sweet? No, it isn't sweet, because I think if it was sweet, it would struggle more with some of the savoury matches that it's so good at. But what has it done to our wonderful marmalade? So, slightly dwarfed perhaps by the citrus notes. That's really interesting, because as I've just said to you, it has worked so well with savoury, spicy dishes and, you know, the whole issue of frozen coffee. But perhaps in the marmalade, it doesn't work quite so well, and that has been a terrific surprise to me. Now, if you watched my Christmas review, you will have seen this Wolfburn Aurora, and I'm on Orkney. This is made probably only 20 miles away, but on mainland Scotland, and it's a very new distillery, new generation, and it's a wonderfully fruity whisky. The nose, certainly after the Skiren, is more floral and fragrant. And just to refresh my palate, well, any excuse, hey? There is a glorious, almost sort of stone fruit, not quite ripe apricots about it, but citrus notes as well, and then I get quite a lot of peatiness at the background, and quite, you know, some people really disagree with me about that, but what it is, I don't know, whether it is peatiness or whether it is actually tannins from the wood in a relatively new distillery, who knows. But with the addition of the Wolfburn into the marmalade, people who have been tasting seem to think I've really hit on something really rather special. Again, this is, what does the citrus bring to the whisky, and what does the whisky bring to the marmalade? The point of citrus in our cooking is to bring out all the other flavours in our food. I patch myself on the chin there. So when you put citrus into something, it's rather like adding salt and pepper. You know, whether you're just adding the citrus zest or the juice, it will enhance and underline and bring to the forefront the flavours of the other ingredients in the dish. And somehow this Wolfburn and the marmalade are an absolutely cracking match for each other. And this has proved to be one of the two outright favourites in this marmalade experiment. So you've got this wonderful brightness and richness of fruit, in the marmalade, and because it works so well, it's like a good marriage or a good friendship. It's not one-way traffic. I'm getting excited, I'm banging my bottles. You know, what the whiskey brings to this, the citrus preserve, the marmalade gives back, echoing the fruit. You see, that fruity, almost apricot note gives an extra depth and body to the marmalade, and giving back the marmalade, and it's obviously still in my palate, but what it will do, or what it does to the whiskey, is it makes everything that's going on in that glass sing. And also, this is a very young whiskey. You know, the distillery has only been up and running for 3 or 4 years, I think. The marmalade actually gives gravitas and depth to the whiskey as well. It's that really, really excellent match. Now then, I've got 6 little piles of marmalade. Okay, if you're being pedantic, I've actually got 5 and a smear left now, and only 5 bottles left. Well, my 4th whiskey marmalade was made with the Scallywag 13-year-old, the, if you like, special edition from Douglas Lang of their remarkable regional malts, Speyside whiskey. And the reason I haven't got any of that left is that the cork, the stopper on the bottle broke, so I decanted it, and then of course there was a lot of air in the decanter, so I just decided I really had to drink it quite quickly. And this is true, dear viewer, the more air to whiskey that's in your bottle, the less true to the desired flavour of the whiskey it will be. So in other words, too much air can actually be to the detriment of your whiskey. So, I've no whiskey to drink with this, but the Scallywag 13-year-old is really complex. It's matured in, I think, Oloroso sherry barrels, which for me somehow overwhelms the actual whiskey. And actually in this instance, it's not a brilliant marriage, and I'm disappointed in that, because I thought the sherry barrel maturation of the whiskey would kind of climb on board with the whole, you know, Seville Orange Spanishy feeling of the marmalade and really enhance the flavour. I'm not saying it isn't nice, because golly, it is nice, but it isn't as outstanding as, say, the Wolfburn. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a very young whiskey that has really made the impression so far. I must just go back to the Highland Park 12-year-old though, because I've tasted lots of things with Highland Park 12-year-old since I've been in Orkney. It's used quite a lot in the food and drinks sector to flavour up foods, you know, not only for the locals but for the tourist trade as well. But I must say that in my marmalade mix, the Highland Park really does give forth of itself, but it can't quite burn as brightly as the Wolfburn there. So these, if you like, are the fruity whiskies that I've tried with the marmalade, and I'm now going to go on to the smokier whiskies. So the Compass Box Great King Street Glasgow blend. Now, I'm a great compass box fan, as you will know if you've watched many of my videos. The Glasgow blend is perhaps it's certainly more challenging than the Great King Street Artist blend. And those two whiskies are meant to represent Edinburgh and Glasgow. So the Artist blend is a much easier whisky. I think of it as summer and strawberry recipes and things of that nature. It's very easy yet full-bodied and fruity. Whereas the Glasgow blend has got a little bit more attitude and a huge heart. And many Glaswegians would say that that would sum them up. I love both cities. They both have so much to offer. Now, what really sticks out as you nose and drink the Glasgow blend is the smokiness of it. And this whisky has a generous dollop of Kahlua in it. I don't know that a generous dollop is actually a technical blending term, but I think you and I understand what I mean, don't we? So, oh, it's a cold weather whisky, it's delicious. That smokiness from the Kahlua really comes in and lingers at the bottom, but you've got this lovely sort of fruity top notes, and oh gosh, you know, it's warming. I'm recording this during the dreadful weather, the beast from the east situation that we have. It used to be called winter. But the actual flavour of that, I'm thinking, is going to be brilliant. Well, obviously I've tried these marmalades before, and I'm thinking it's going to be brilliant in the marmalade. Whoops. When you play food and drink matching, you're kind of looking for two things if it works really well. One is a complementary flavour. So two things which are quite different but go together really well. And then you have the wonderful, you know, full-on, gosh, these are brilliant together. Now, and very, very similar. And they create a sort of a homogenised whole in your mouth, W-H-O-L-E, when you take the two together. Now, the smokiness that is in the Glasgow blend really underpins the fruitiness of the marmalade. But with the Highland Park, which has got, you know, 20% peated malt in it, what the peated malt did in that was actually at that sort of level, it really made the fruitiness shine through. Now, with the compass box, what the peat has done is it has introduced something quite different to the marmalade. It's a bit like having a fennel salami and coming across the fennel seed in it. You know, it's suddenly a very different flavour from that salted pork with the red wine that, you know, you're kind of used to with salami flavours. You suddenly come across the spice. And that is how the smoke is acting in this marmalade. And for my palate, it works really, really well. But my final marmalade is made with the Ailsa Bay. Now, this is, as I've said to you in my previous whisky videos, it's really full on. It's huge on peat, but it's also huge on sweetness. Now, my new best whisky friend up here in Orkney, which is where we now live, she really struggles with this whisky to drink. And so do a lot of other people, I have to say. When I've used it in tastings, it's been a sort of ooh, you know, don't go there. I don't want to know about that. But I love it. I absolutely love it. It is very full on, and when you drink it straight like this, it is all about the peat. And because the peat is, if you like, a little bit ferocious, it kind of gobbles up the sweetness of the whiskey and makes it a little bit more difficult. But when you put it into marmalade, it has exactly the same effect as it does when you drink it with, say, a chocolate brownie. Now, I think that was the Ailsa Bay. Yes, it was. What happens... What happens, dear viewer, is that the sweetness of the marmalade kind of tames the whiskey. It tames back that huge peatiness and draws upon the sweet notes, which are actually designated here on the label of the whiskey as well. And it makes this utterly wonderful flavour sensation in the mouth. And the whiskey itself pulls out the bitterness of the fruit, which of course is counteracted by the sugar that goes into the marmalade. But I always say to people when I'm teaching them how to taste, is that if you actually want to learn what the flavour of bitter is, there is one season in the year when you can do that, and that is when several oranges are in season. And it's a really brave thing to do, to nibble on the flesh of the several, but also to eat the zest and pith raw, because goodness me, it will make your hair stand up. You won't need hair gel ever again. But I suppose the closest we get to it is Campari. Otherwise, I don't know, you may have other ideas. But this, to me, becomes a real exploration of bitter and smoke, or peatiness, and how, as I've said for so many whiskey videos, how the two of them together with sweetness are such a wonderful combination. Now, in our household, we have a bit of a rule that you can only have whiskey on your porridge when there's snow on the ground. And that really doesn't happen very often, either in Sussex or here in Orkney. But I have found a way around it now, because these whiskey marmalades have been fabulous on porridge. They are just unbelievable. And I usually put some cinnamon and chopped apple into my porridge. You then don't need sugar at all, and it is just wonderful. So the results of the jury, and that's not just me, it's nephews and nieces who've been staying and friends who've popped round to do this tasting, is that if you like a fruity whiskey marmalade, the Wolfburn Aurora takes first place. And if you like a peaty whiskey marmalade, then Ailsa Bay leaps into pole position. Now, that's not to say that any of them weren't fantastic. The Skiren, I do feel, got a little bit lost, but this whiskey can still hold its head up high as being a brilliant whiskey to have with food. The Highland Park 12-year-old just made the marmalade sing all about fruit, And the King Street Glasgow blend from Compass Box sort of set the stage for Ailsa Bay coming in and scooping the Oscar, if you like. And then the Scallywag 13-year-old also provided a very fruity Whisky Marmalade, but I would like to try that again with the regular Scallywag and see what happened there. And in that blend, incidentally, I don't know if it's Benromac or not, but there is a peatiness in it. So rather like the Highland Park, it suddenly starts to open up and season everything else. So, what am I going to say to you for next time you make Whisky Marmalade? I would go for either a very fruity whiskey to put into it, or a very, very smoky whiskey to put into it. And I would say that that will be the marmalade for the winter months, and that will be the marmalade for the summer months. Does that sound pretentious? I'm sorry if it does, but let's face it, the weather changes, so your food changes, and I think which whiskey you drink changes as well. So, thanks for joining in. I know a lot of you, if you love whiskey, will probably love marmalade as well. So if you can't wait till next January to try this out, get yourself one of those tins of Marmade, prepared Seville oranges, and give it a go with the whiskies in your cupboard. It's the most enormous fun. Cheers for now. Bye.